And coming up next, it's the latest craze. It's all the rage. Sleep for days. It's the latest trend circulating in the ever-growing sleep-deprived nation. It's a 4-day sleep vacation that promises to heal and rejuvenate, but is it safe? We'll find out when we come back right after this.
I'll admit it. I was fascinated and intrigued when I first heard of it. Sleep for days. It was hope for those of us with any sort of sleep disorder or anyone who is overworked or underrested. More than half of the population of the entire world fits into this category, according to the latest study by the Institute of Sleep and Mental Health. Based on the data collected over the years, the Institute of Sleep and Mental Health, or the ISMH, determined that the average American sleeps less than 4 hours a night, and even then they're not sleeping well. So a solution was born, a breakthrough in medical history, and the possible cure for sleep disorders was storming the media. Every news channel, every social media site, every radio broadcast or audio broadcast was running the ad by a company called Reliqua, which is Latin for rest. The process was simple. Place an overworked and underrested, red-blooded human being in a comfortable environment in a coma-induced state for 4 days. Afterwards, they will feel rejuvenated and full of spunk, and, of course, ready to return to the hustle and bustle of everyday life. It received great reviews. Of course, every movie star, music star, and wannabe celebrity were the first to boast of its game-changing effects on their lives. At least that was the angle the company chose to advertise its new product. Every day, we were bombarded by some movie star about how incredibly safe and wonderful the Sleep for Days experience was. Of course, there were possible but extremely rare side effects.
Side effects include profuse sweating for up to 2 weeks, nervousness, nausea, weakness, and dizziness. Some rare but more serious side effects can include insomnia, manic depression, post-traumatic stress disorder,
And coma.
And coma. I sat hopelessly, listening to the perpetual steady chirp of the heart monitor. Rita, my wife, was one of those rare side effects. With an attempt to avoid a lawsuit, and even more important, to avoid bad press, which could tarnish the company's reputation, the attorneys from Reliqua arranged to provide the absolute best medical attention at no cost to me. I, of course, had to agree by signing a gag order and other papers stating I would not hold the company responsible if she never recovered. I was so hesitant to sign it, but in the end, I gave in because my insurance would not cover the unusual situation Rita had chosen to put herself in. That was one of the warnings Reliqua failed to mention, that you could be on your own if or when something awful happens. I brought Rita a vase of geraniums I picked from our flower garden. She absolutely detested paying for flowers. Why would anyone spend that kind of money on something that is dying every minute? She would say that often. I would always laugh when she said that because Rita was not a cheap lady. She had one exception: flowers and florists. I often teased her that she must have been assaulted by a flower delivery guy when she was a child and that she was taking it out on every other florist in the world. That argument always ended with us both laughing out loud. I began to grin and eventually laugh. It was nice. I'd been under so much stress lately, and it felt good to have a genuine laugh. But after that, I ended up crying again, holding on to the pale, motionless hand of my wife of 25 years. No sooner than it started, the sobbing stopped. I decided the time for heartache and self-pity was over. I had to think of Rita. The specialist said I should talk to her as if she were able to respond.
It's perfectly okay to talk about fond memories. Just don't get hung up on them, because that's the past, and you want Rita to be here now. Rather, talk about your day or your favorite TV show, anything you would normally talk to her about. She needs to hear your voice, and you need to ask her questions that she will want to answer. She can hear you. Her brainwaves indicate that she is aware, though it is a slight awareness. So just talk to her.
I wiped the last tear away, gathered my thoughts. I would start with a memory, then I would see where that led to. Do you remember a few years ago when we went to the Canary Islands and you were sunbathing and I was snorkeling? I found that rare hermit crab, and I was so excited to show you. I came running up, a handful of them, but one was more beautiful than the rest. Blood red, with a perfectly smooth brown and white shell. I laid them all down and they were crawling every which way. Then that lifeguard came running up to me, chewing me out in Spanish. Remember? I felt like a 6-year-old being scolded. All he could say in English was, "Put it back, put it back." Anyway, I never told you this, but when I released the crabs, the red one fell into a hole in the coral. It was a deep hole, you know. I kept diving down and trying to reach it, but my arm just wasn't long enough. The hole was wide enough for my arm, but the poor crab was so far down that I eventually gave up. Anyway, at least once a week I think about that crab. And I think of all these different ways I could have gotten it out. I could have left a towel down there, stuffed it in the hole, and the crab could have just climbed out. Maybe a stick or a rod or some sort. And at one time I thought I could have used the snorkel to maybe scoop him up. Maybe attach a piece of meat to a fishing line and fish him back out. Instead, I just waved at the lifeguard and assured him that the crabs were free and back home. I may have done the poor thing a favor by giving her a safe place to live, but I can't help but wonder if I may have doomed the poor thing by trapping it in an inescapable jail for some, I don't know, starfish or moray eel to come along and just pick it off. So what do you think? Do you think it could have survived? It's not something I beat myself up about. You know, I just think about it a lot. Especially when I'm brushing my teeth. That's the kind of stuff I think when I'm brushing my teeth. Do you ever have those thoughts, hon? Those recurring thoughts that make no sense and have no bearing on your life. At least as we know it, but they just keep coming back to you. Tell me one of yours. Well, I'm going to get some lunch. What are you in the mood for? And don't tell me you don't care. I'm not buying into that one. So, how does Italian sound? Spaghetti? Lasagna? Ravioli? Or how about Chinese? Fried egg rolls? Fried rice? Maybe some curry chicken to split? Ooh. Maybe the hospital cafeteria serving chicken and dressing today. Or meatloaf. How does that sound? Okay. Soul food it is. I'll just bring you back a plate. By the way, all expenses are paid if we eat at the hospital. Courtesy of Reliqua Pharmaceuticals. I had to fight off the urge to cry again. I decided I would not show any sorrow. Even though her eyes were closed, I would act as if she could see me. If Rita could see me now, she would ask in a heartbeat, "Honey, what's wrong?" So I played along. I immediately covered up with, "I think I'm going to see the nurse. I'm going to ask her if she has any antihistamine. My eyes are itchy. I'll be back with lunch. Love you." I kissed her on the forehead and went to get lunch. I returned about 15 minutes later with 2 baked chicken dinners with brown rice, green beans, and, of course, a side of apple cobbler for us to split. "Okay, sweetheart, I stopped mid-sentence when I noticed that her right arm was hanging over the side of the bed. The covers were a bit messy. I immediately got angry. I tucked Rita's cold hand back under the sheets. After that, I walked into the hall to confront the nurse who normally took care of the routine procedures. "Mrs. Thomas," I started firmly while scratching the bottom of my shoes with my toes so I could keep the tone of my voice steady. "The next time you check on my wife, do me a favor, would you? At least try to put her back the way you found her. Her arm was hanging over the rail. She had no blood circulating through it. It was cold as ice. Not to mention the sheets were just tossed back on top of her. That is my wife. We have been married longer than you've been. Seeing the confusion on her face, my voice trickled away quickly. We gave one another a wide-eyed stare, then simultaneously bolted back towards the room. How was she laying before? She asked, pointing. On her back, arms under the sheets on both sides. Rita's head was sideways on the pillow. I almost yelled with a huge smile growing over my face. Her head was straight forward when I just left the room. She could move. Doctors were called. Tests were conducted. That went on the rest of the day. It would be morning before the doctor or doctors would disclose any test results. I stayed up until 2 a.m. in the morning, asking her questions, talking to her, and just trying to get some sort of sign that she was aware of anything at all. I eventually tired and laid on the guest bench for what was left of a decent night's sleep. I wondered what the results would be. What was it that caused her to move? Was she trying to wake up? If I had been there, would it have made a difference? I was so tired, I began to drift off, but realized just how incredibly thirsty I was. I'd just gotten comfortable too, so I almost ignored it. I couldn't, though. I kicked off the covers, grabbed my hospital-issued water bottle, and went down to the cafeteria for an iced water refill. I was so thirsty I had to refill twice from drinking it down completely. I guess I'd neglected my own body while trying so desperately to revive Rita's. Tired and bloated, I shuffled my way back towards the room, feeling the ice water slosh back and forth in my swollen belly. I would probably be going to the restroom quite a few times before dawn. Just to the right of the nurse's station was an older man who was having knee surgery, Mr. James McElroy. We'd met a few times, and I told him about my wife's coma without disclosing too much. We began to talk here and there over the past few days. His knee surgery didn't go too well, and he contracted a staph infection, so he had to stay over a few more days. I glanced into his room, knowing that he was a bit of a night owl. He appeared to be asleep and had a guest with him, so I didn't stare. A bit confused, though, I gave a second glance before I completely slipped by. Was that a dog I just saw? Amused, I eased back to see the silhouette of a tall person with a dog standing over his bed. I quickly ducked back away like a 10-year-old spying on a family member. Whoever it was had to have seen me. I sort of giggled to myself and headed back towards Rita. Who was that, though? Mr. McElroy did not mention any family that he had nearby. In fact, he flew in to have his surgery. His wife passed over 5 years ago, and, well, I was pretty sure he said he was here all alone. It's just a simple knee surgery, so I told my kids not to bother. He just said that yesterday morning. Maybe it was a hospital pet visit or something. I'd heard of that before. People would often bring really good dogs, well-behaved dogs, to the hospital to cheer up sick folks and children. Maybe tomorrow I would ask the nurse if they could bring the critter by to see Rita. She just loved dogs. Over the years, she and I had buried many loved pets, but decided not to put ourselves through it again as we were getting up in age. Of all the dogs we had, Lucy was the most missed. She and I butted heads quite a few times, but she was truly a mama's dog. Lucy and Rita were inseparable. On certain nights, I would have to sleep on the couch due to my snoring. Rita suffered from terrible nightmares from time to time. Night terrors, actually. Lucy would always be there to wake her up. Out of pure desperation, I began to sob again. I paused just outside the door, just until I regained my composure. Something caught my eye to the left. A tall silhouette with a furry companion slowly exited Mr. McElroy's room. I turned away quickly, wiping away any trace of tears from my eyes. I swiftly entered Rita's room, just after shooting a glance down the hallway. Standing there in the doorway, I realized just how ice cold I'd become. The freezing bottle in my hand seemed to penetrate my palm, travel up my arm, and engulf my entire body in a cold chill. Something wasn't right about what I'd just seen in the hallway. My heart began to pound in my chest. I could no longer hold on to the cold bottle in my hand. It slipped out of my hand and slammed hard onto the cold tiles, jarring me into action. I spun around and, leaning on the left door frame with all my weight, I eased my head out the door and watched as a tall silhouette with some sort of animal disappeared into the dark end of the hall. A silent whine began to grow in my left ear. The figure seemed to drift deeper into the darkness and then swiftly sank into another open door to the left. Another cold chill ran through my body as a voice in my head told me that it did not look human. The whine in my left ear began to grow louder, as did my pumping heart, and now rapid breathing. I instinctively began walking towards the ever-growing whine. I was drawn to it like a bug to a blue light. Standing there in a hallway, my eyes fixed solidly on the darkness down at the end of the hall, I began to slowly creep forward until the whine became louder and louder. Still staring forward, I realized where the source of the whine was coming from. By this point, I was standing in front of Mr. McElroy's room. I turned to look inside. The eerie green glow of a heart monitor screen with a solid green line running across cast a faint glow onto the old man. His eyes glowed green, bulging from his cold, dead face. I was immediately shoved aside by two nurses who flipped the light on and, after a few words back and forth, began performing a swift round of CPR. I stared in disbelief for a second or two, then continued to creep down the dark end of the hall. The fading commotion now behind me began to fade into a muffled shouting match. I approached the room near the end of the hall, where I saw the tall figure and its furry beast enter. I braced myself, and with a deep breath, jammed my face into the doorway. There it was, solid black, tall. I could see the surrounding medical equipment's lights in its enormous black, lifeless eyes. It stared straight through me, and its skinny, solid black face folded into a wicked snarl. With a long hand that stretched across the entire room, it touched my forehead, sending me backwards, smacking the back of my skull against the opposite wall. Against the ringing and commotion down the hall, I fought to keep conscious, as the newly added ringing in my ears threatened to take me into unconsciousness. I began to panic as I feared being left there with that thing so close to me. My vision was blurry and darkening, but I fought to stand back up. I rolled over once or twice, nearly tripping a young man in scrubs who didn't see me at first. The young man helped me to my feet and began quickly asking what happened. Over his shoulder, I cast a panicked look back into the room. It was gone.
I'm okay. I just fell.
He immediately took off down the lit end of the hall. I kept up the best I could, swaying from one side of the hall to the other until I developed a steady gait. The panic I felt began to grow inside my chest when I began to wonder where that thing went. My pace quickened as I began to trot back towards the commotion. I could hear the nurse shouting as I shot by the old man's room.
Claire!
Staring at the approaching blurry doorway where my wife lay, I began to run. "Rita! Rita!" I shouted as I collapsed inside the doorway of her room. I screamed when I saw her sitting upright with an outstretched hand pointing directly at me. Her eyes, solid black, except for the lights from the room's glowing electronic equipment. I fell backwards with a loud huff of air and blanked out of existence. Good morning.
My eyes ached from the light. I could feel that I was in bed, but I didn't know exactly where. I tried to sit up, but the pain in my head was excruciating. I began to blink my eyes, but they felt as if they were stuffed with Vaseline. That voice. I blinked and blinked until I began to see. That voice! I turned my head to see my wife laying next to me. All I could see was her aura, but I knew it well enough. Damning all the pain and confusion, I leapt to my feet and wrapped my arms around her frail body, sobbing all over her chest and neck, but tried not to squeeze the life back out of her. Later on, after breakfast, we were visited by the doctor. The lawyers from Reliqua would come to visit afterwards. That was quite an eventful night, wouldn't you say? The flood of panic and disarray of the previous night, or rather early morning, began to resurface. What happened to Mr. McElroy? I asked. He passed away, I'm afraid. His heart was in worse condition than his knee, I suppose. I guess it was just his time to go. I couldn't shake the vision of that black figure I'd seen, but in the brightly lit room it seemed more like a distant dream than anything. You want to tell me what happened to you last night? The doctor asked, shining a light into each of my pupils. As my eyes adjusted, I began to feel the months of sorrow and fatigue I'd been carrying around. I really did not have the strength to lie to him. I was thirsty, so I got some ice water. I saw something in the hallway. A tall, black thing. I shot an embarrassed look at Rita and finally to the doctor. I began to brush it away to save myself the humility. I don't know, I may have just been too sleep deprived. Was it a tall, black figure with some sort of animal? The doctor asked, with a look of concern and confusion. Yes! You seen it? He pointed to Rita. Then, staring at the floor, he began to nervously chew on the end of his pen. Rita said with a weak, cold stare, I have.
That thing has been tormenting me for months. It's been holding me here in the dark. But this morning, when you called my name, it finally just let me go.
That was over 6 months ago, and the whole thing was more than just a nightmare. Either way, Rita and I have been sleeping soundly ever since. As for Reliqua, they continue to function. I guess it's business as usual. Every once in a while, we'll catch a news story about how someone had strange side effects, but there's never any details about it. I don't think it would be entirely fair to blame Reliqua for what happened to Rita. But nevertheless, from this point on, we will sleep on our own terms.